It's wonderful to be back again with you all. Today, I would like to take up the practice of awakening. In other words, what really is awakening and how do we really practice that? In a word, we can say the practice is the practice of reality, reality practicing itself. But what does that really mean? How do we really do that? Looking back at the beginning of the Buddhist tradition in the old Pali Suttas, one of them is called the Vinaya. There it says very succinctly, exactly, awakening is the way. In the Zen traditions, there are many such expressions. In the early Zen tradition, for example, the great early Chinese Zen master Guishan, who lived about the same time as Lin Chi or Rinzai. At the end of one of his famous poems, he speaks of awakening is the standard or the criterion. In context, he says, inquire exhaustively into the Dharma principle. Take awakening as your standard. To look at it from the other side, we can say, to not practice properly is to wrap ourselves up in the chains of our own self-delusions and then seek to get free. Once again, how do we actually practice so as to, in a word, practice from awakening rather than forever trying to practice to it or toward it? The first point, to begin, we must drop our own standard, our own criteria, our own measure, our own benchmark. In other words, we cannot bring the standard, the measure of the self-seeking self, the deluded self. If we bring that measure, that standard, we cannot practice. We are just practicing the self. We are a cat chasing its own tail, and we all know what that is like. We must drop, let go of our own self-centered standard. Without then picking up another one. To say awakening is the standard, when we really understand that, it's not dropping one set of chains and picking up another set of chains, perhaps a Buddhistic or a Zenistic one. It's dropping everything. We have to be able to be humble and open in this practice. This is the same thing as saying to drop, to let go of our own self-centered standard. I want it to be this way. We have to be humble and open to begin. in a very good sense, to not know, to not know, to undo the deluded self's world and ideas and thoughts. To put it simply, to let go of all that we think we are, to let go of all that we think we know, and not replace it with something else. This is the marvel of genuine Zen practice, of Zazen itself. To drop, to let go of our own assumptions and much, much more, without replacing them with anything else. In a sense, this is what frees us to practice. In other words, here is where we can really begin the practice, not from the standpoint of the self, which is really not a standpoint at all. It's just a dis-ease, a wavering. We cannot begin there. In a word, we begin when we let go of any notion of illusion, let alone awakening. That's what it is to take awakening as your standard, not to put something up there, precisely not to turn awakening into some kind of a goal. That is not practicing awakening. That is not the practice of awakening. To set up some objective, some goal, call it awakening or whatever you would like, is just continuing the same delusive process. Once again, to let go of everything and to not need to replace it with anything, even so-called awakening. To not turn even that into some kind of a goal that we then chase after. The whole direction of the practice then, turns on itself in a very good way, rather than dispersing out into, well, this guy said this and I read that and so on. Your thoughts about this, it's endless. It's endless. It's actually dispersing. Instead, the concentration naturally turns on itself, the source of itself, rather than out into thoughts, ideas, notions, and so on. Not dispersing. This is the great value of the discipline of samadhi, of concentrated oneness, of exactly what is being done this weekend. Sitting hour after hour so that we can see, confirm in our own bones what this is. How? By not turning it into anything, not turning it into a thing. Once again, this is what frees us to practice. It doesn't free us from practice. This is where we really can practice, give all of ourselves to the practice. We cannot help but give all of ourselves to this. In Buddhism and in Zen, there's the technical term, the life root is cut off, the root of life cut off. Really, it's the root of life and death, birth and death, cut off. But in a more positive sense, we can say this is realizing the unbound nature of things and of ourselves. unbound, ungraspable, inconceivable. Oh, yes, we can grasp it, we can conceive it, but that's not it. That's just a shadow of it. We already know that. We've done that 1,000 times. This truly is, in a very, very positive sense, boundless, inconceivable, ungraspable. In technical Buddhist terms, unconditioned. It is not a condition, a big one or a small one. This practice as awakening is boundless, inconceivable, ungraspable, not because it is in some distant place. On the contrary, because it is right here, before mind arises, before a thought has even arisen, before the idea of illusion, awakening, has even arisen. Here, this, it is not abstract. It is not distant. What is abstract and distant is our conception of it, huh? Our idea of it, what we chase after. That is the abstraction. This is not abstract or distant in any way. There are endless expressions that describe, give expression to this. One very simple one. When the Dharma is not fully realized in the body and the mind, we think it is enough. But when the Dharma is fully realized in the body and the mind, we see what's missing, or we see it as it is. This is a famous statement from Dogen in his Genjo Koan. When we are on the way, when we are practicing the way, we may get to the point where we feel, yes, I know, this is it. This is enough. Enough, it's more than enough. Oh, it's what Jeff was saying. It's boundless, it's ungraspable. Dogen then goes on to say, but when it's fully realized in the body and the mind, we see what's missing. You follow? This is truly not to turn it into anything. We truly see, I would put it, what needs to be done. That is to see it as it is. It is free even of itself. If it's become something, I like to call it total and complete, constant, and we turn that into something even total and complete and constant, that's not it. That's just a shadow of it. That's the self trying to grapple with it, trying to make it its own. We don't need to make it our own. It already is. That's why I call it the practice of awakening, not the practice to awakening or the practice toward awakening, but the practice of awakening. With this, the burden, the delusion of the self is gone. A good place to begin, huh? To be free of itself, to be without self, to be without self. In Buddhism, one of the most fundamental ways of expressing this is the flame extinguished, nirvana. In the suttas, sometimes Gautama Buddha is asked about who it is that awakens. What is this being? Where does it go? What do you become when you become awakened? Where do you go? And Gautama Buddha tried to explain it by saying, the question was asked, does it go in what direction? Where does it go? And Gautama Buddha said, when you have a flame and it is burning, and when all of the fuel that feeds that flame has been used up, the flame goes out. The flame is extinguished. Does it make sense then to ask, did it go north or did it go south? Did it go east or did it go west? Did it go up or did it go down? It does not apply. It didn't go anywhere. It went out. It doesn't need to go anywhere anymore. It is the self wavering that feels the need to go somewhere constantly, but it can never get there. And so this fundamental notion of Buddhism, nirvana, or in Pali nibbana, is the flame extinguished. It doesn't go anywhere. We cannot use our self-centered criteria, right? Well, which way did it go? So I can chase after it. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't need to go anywhere. The self-delusion, the craving, the fuel that has been feeding it has dried up. Again, it is also called literally unconditioned. It is not a condition, it is without conditions. The self-standard does not apply here. More importantly, we don't need to apply it here, do we? Another fundamental way of expressing this in early Buddhism is what ends up being the term Buddha itself. In other words, the fundamental point of Buddhism is to realize, to awaken to what is called Buddha. That is literally the dreamer wakes up, awakens. That is the meaning of a Buddha. Of course, it is a metaphor, a simile, but it's an effective one. It's a useful one. Because when we are in the dream, oh yes, it can be very painful, very frightening. We all know that. A dream, a nightmare. Oh yes. And there's usually no way to get out, and the nightmare is there. You try to open the door and it doesn't open, and the monster is coming at you. As is often said in the Zen texts. Well, what do you need to do? The farther you run, the more the monster chases you. The harder you try to open the door, the more it stays shut. Well, there's only one thing to do if we speak of doing, and that is to wake up. To wake up. What happens when you actually wake up? You can then see the dream for what it was. Within the dream, you cannot do that. Even what's called lucid dreaming, you can realize you're dreaming in the dream, but you're still dreaming. When you wake up, the whole thing was just a dream. It's obvious from here. Me in the dream, it was just a dream. The monster in the dream was just a dream. The whole world of the dream world, was just a dream. It was nothing. It's something we now can laugh at. How absurd to be chasing after a dream or running away from a dream. But we only know this when we actually wake up. Again, awakening here is not from the sleep state, but from this state of the self grasping on to something, someone, somewhere, somehow, anything. That is the dream, the nightmare, the delusion. When that is released, awakening, the dreamer awakes. Well, they're no longer the dreamer then. Do you see? Where is the dream once you wake up? It's gone. Where are the hindrances? Those painful knees, those endless thoughts, those enormous struggles. Well, in the dream, they were very real. But when you practice the practice of reality, of this, the hindrances are not really hindrances, are they? They can't really hinder, obstruct. They cannot. You must confirm this in your own bones by practicing the practice of awakening itself. When you wake up, what happens? What changes? What changes when you wake up? Well, you could say nothing, except you're awake now. Nothing changes, and yet everything has been transformed from the ground up, released, freed of itself. The seeking self has dissolved without a trace, has become undone at the source. That's what it is to wake up. What do we return to then? Well, in a sense, we return fully right here. Yes, right here, awake, without form, without being closed in by anything, without the form of self, being without self, which isn't really a state of being at all. Here is the importance of what is called after awakening practice. How could there be a practice after awakening? There's nothing more to practice. Well, in a sense, yes, but in another sense, it's even more important, or at least as important, to know how to practice then, to work through any remaining patterns that might still come up, blind spots that might still be there. If we are humble and we respond, we will see them. If we are sincere and we are able to serve others, it shows us the way we must go. But in one sense, that practice, happily, is endless. To continue to work through that in every aspect of our life, here, awake. Yes. From the standpoint of the self holding on to itself, in a sense, practice is impossible. It's inconceivable in a negative sense. It's ungraspable in a bad way. But when we simply give all of ourselves to the practice, when there is nothing else to do, when this is what must be done, it is inevitable. It will be done. It is done. It is inevitable, irresistible. It's irresistible. For the struggling self, all of the diversions seem irresistible. One more time to indulge in that, although I already know it doesn't go anywhere, but maybe one more time. When we've really settled into the practice of awakening itself, it's inevitable. It's irresistible. It's this, free of self, unbound, unconditioned, a joy and a peace that is beyond limit. I like to speak of it as love. It's where the creative act really comes out, creatively responding in and as the world, with compassion, with love. Once again, if you wrap yourself up in your own self-delusive chains and then complain you can't get free, you have to see what you're doing. It is you and no one else. It is you and no one else. Do not let go of one set of chains and pick up another. You don't need them. You don't need them. You are free. Dare to prove it, to confirm it, to embody it. That is the practice of awakening. Then awakening is literally not a thing. It's not a thing. There's not a trace as it seamlessly works in the world. Here is where proper guidance can be so helpful here. Although each one of us must do the work ourselves. I will join you again tomorrow for one more Dharma talk. In the meantime, please give yourself to this marvelous practice of awakening. Marie-Claude, if I may ask, maybe we can take a few minutes for everyone to stand up and stretch, and then if there's any questions or discussion. Okay, Marie-Claude?
Okay.
Thank you all for listening.
Okay, I think it's time for question, for comment. Is there someone who will start? Begin? I have to search on 2 or 3 screens, so please raise your hand and keep it raised up long enough so I can see. Maybe I can. I have a question. You say that we have to stop running after ourselves, to chase. You use chasing, and to do that we have to stop literally dreaming.
Yes.
Sometimes I feel that we don't even are aware that we are dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have an advice to
This is the value of concentrated zazen, one of the great virtues. When you sit in sustained zazen, you can see what the mind is doing. This is difficult in daily life. When we are busy with many things, we have to pay attention to many things. These are important and they need our care, our attention. So to have a time for concentrated zazen, or even better, what you're doing now, a weekend retreat, to go hour after hour and to pour yourself into this practice. It's almost as if the mind that may have been speeding recklessly, it usually takes some time, some hours, perhaps a day, for that mind to actually slow down, as it simply, again, not dispersing into those thoughts, ideas, but allowing the concentration to fall in on itself. Do you know what I mean, Marie-Claude?
Yes, I'm.
Just to not, in a sense, this is the difficult part, the mind dispersing in 100 different directions. So with Zazen, with the breath, with the body, again, all of this is very valuable and very important. I don't mean to deny it when I talk about the practice as the practice of awakening. All of these things, practicing with the body properly, practicing with the mind properly, practicing with the breath properly, all of this is very, very valuable. But it can also be something that we obsess about and turn into a kind of a hindrance in itself. So the basic point of taking that speeding mind, racing mind, which we all know as lay people involved in the world, we are doing things of value. This is wonderful and good. But to take time and just give ourselves to sustained zazen, when we are doing it properly, it does take some time, yes. But even a weekend, as you're doing now, that's enough to start to see what it is for that mind, this mind, to actually slow down more and more, to really slow down. And at one point, you may realize it has stopped. But it's true, as you say, often in our daily life, we don't even realize it. We don't even realize that, in effect, we're chasing our own tail and wondering why we're so tired. And we want to blame something, some condition, some situation. So this is the great value of this formal practice, sitting in a certain posture, breathing in a certain way, having a certain mental attitude, and experiencing, as you have, Marie-Claude, what it is for that mind, not just to slow down. Things become very, very clear, very, very calm. And finally, in effect, to stop. In a sense, then to see what is there, that is to wake up. That is to wake up. And it's always underfoot. You already know this, right, Marie-Claude?
Yes, I know. But I would like to have a trick to. I feel I feel that every day I have to start from the beginning. It's like it's the slowing down. Yes, during your retreat, it's very good. It's become strong, but every day I think I'm a beginner all the time. There's not something that I can hold on and say, yes, I get to this point now. I always feel that I have to start right from the beginning. But I suppose it's normal.
Is this a matter of bringing your own benchmark to the practice?
No.
No? It's not?
No, I really don't think so.
I hope not. But you will see, It slows down, it speeds up, it slows down, it speeds up. That's not really the problem. Just once to see where it really is. You can be moving at 100 miles an hour and still stop, still be stopped. That's the point of awakening, you see. When you really awaken to this, it doesn't matter how fast you move. But once to let that come to its own end. Yes, for the dreamer to wake up. And when you wake up, you realize you don't become someone else. You, if I can say it, you come back to who you really are. It sounds strange, but you realize who you really are and have always been. You have touched this, haven't you, Marie-Claude?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Let that show you the way you must go.
Louis?
Yes, Jeff. Just going on what Marie-Claude was saying.
Yes.
I did a lot of work during the last week on the house, and I saw how the mind was running in all directions. Okay. But at the same time, at times, it's as if you see it going around, but you're not taken in by it. You just see it go. And what I've seen is that I befriend it. It's as if a smile comes up. It isn't a problem anymore. It kind of goes on by itself, but it isn't something that I resist in any way. I just see it going. I take it in some way. I embrace it. Okay, I don't resist it, and then it just goes on. It goes on again. I see it. I befriend it, and it goes on. So, could you say something about that, please?
I think you've expressed it well, and I trust your house looks a lot better as a result.
Yes, it does. It does. Been running a lot.
I think that the appearance of your house now and it being repaired and fixed is a better answer than I can give.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Louis.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hello. In that story that you told of the Buddha talking about where the fire goes, I think he also goes on to explain to the person who's questioning him. He makes an analogy about a tree without leaves, without branches, without bark, and just being like the core heartwood. Obviously, there's a lot of symbolism there. But what does it mean?
Do you know the fire sermon?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a remarkable example in early Buddhism of this. These are people who were basically fire worshipers. Their spiritual practice was worshiping fire in a way. And they had a huge group with a leader, and they went to listen to Gautama Buddha. And he decided somehow to speak about what is burning. What is burning? And he goes through and he basically says, everything is burning with the fire of desire, of craving, of passion. The eyes are burning, the nose is burning, the ears are burning, the world is burning. Everything is on fire. And apparently that was such a powerful sermon to these people at that time, themselves fire worshipers, that the whole group, as well as the leader, converted, so to speak, and became followers of Gautama Buddha. This was a very important move in the beginning of Buddhism. But this notion of the flame, it's gone out. It sounds negative. The life, the spirit is gone. This is the danger. That's not what it means at all. The craving to be, to have something, even the craving to cease to exist, is undone, put to rest, extinguished. Zen doesn't usually speak that way. There's a certain dynamic in Zen. But these stories, legends from early Buddhism can really be a great inspiration. You, David Mushin, you're now studying this stuff, huh?
Yes.
Yes. Is there anything else you would like to say?
I'm just very grateful that we have this opportunity to sit and try to integrate sitting into my practice with this adjustment that I've had to make for school.
Yeah.
It's a lot of hours of study, and it pulls me away from the cushion sometimes. So this opportunity is really helpful. I think it will be, to kind of bolster my practice and hopefully put me back on track, as I was sitting probably significantly more before school. But
Yeah.
the middle way, right?
There's an expression in Japanese, gaku gyo ichinyo, meaning study and practice are one thing. I would like to say gyo gaku ichinyo, practice and study are one thing. Because the focus in a fundamental sense needs to be on the practice, not the intellectual study. It can be very valuable, a very great benefit if it's done, how to say, from out of the practice. So I trust soon you will get to the point where you're not leaving the cushion to do your studies, and you're not leaving your studies to sit on the cushion. It can take some time, but you set yourself out to that. So please, please.
I'm not there yet, but I'm working.
I look forward to learning from you.
Thank you.
The very basic notions from early Buddhism were brought up. For example, what awakening is, to be a Buddha or Bodhi. To wake up from the dream, the delusion, perhaps the nightmare of self-entangled, self-deluded existence. I also spoke of the notion of nirvana or nibbana being extinguishing the flame. When the flame of self-deluded, of self-delusion is truly extinguished, the fuel that feeds it has dried up and gone out. This full and final release is described, for example, in what direction did it go? Well, it didn't go anywhere. It didn't go north, south, east, or west, above or below. It went out. It has gone out. We cannot use the self-centered self's judgment or benchmark criteria here. It just doesn't work. That doesn't mean that anything goes, nor does it mean that you then blindly follow someone or something else. We might say the basic point of Zen practice, that is the practice that is awakening, is to let go of all of the things that we think we are, all of the things that we think at all. To let go of it all and not replace it with anything else. We don't need to do that. To put it another way, once you realize there is no self-confined form that you are, once you really see that, well, in a marvelous, wonderful way. There is no self to come back to. And far from being frightening or threatening, this is full and final release, even, especially from itself. I have spoken for a couple of decades, especially this year with online Dharma talks, about the practice of the body, the breath, and the mind. What kind of hindrances arise? What kind of techniques, so to speak, can be helpful in letting go of those hindrances? Yesterday and today, I am focusing on, in a sense, the fundamental question of what is this awakening? What is this practice that cannot be apart from, separate from awakening itself? Certainly, those helpful techniques of body, of breath, of mind, extremely helpful, extremely helpful. They're not to be made light of or ignored. You need to master those techniques in order to sustain the samadhi, the concentrated oneness, and let it be constant and complete. But the point is that practice, when done properly, is itself the practice of awakening. It is itself dropping the very notion that I'm practicing here and now in order to get to some other place, the world of awakening. No more delusion. Well, this is itself a delusion. Genuine practice comes from awakening. It must. Where else can it come from? If there are hindrances in your practice, pain, drowsiness, wavering mind, and so on, this is where you need to apply yourself to see what is really there. From where are you practicing right here and now? From where? And to where are you practicing? Where are you trying to get to? You must see through that tangle for yourself. You don't need to seek awakening. As soon as you do, you've already put it outside as an object. That's not it. You've already tripped over your own feet. You don't need to seek after some awakening. You don't need to even seek some answer to your question. All you really need to do is open up to deepen the question that you are. The question that remains, that is you. Awakening is seeking itself and finding itself in each and everything. When you really open up and give yourself to this, Your own practice shows you the way home. It is the way home. Yes, the techniques can be helpful. They can also become a preoccupation, an obsession, a constant working on perfecting some kind of mental technique or breath or so on. Beware. Those techniques are helpful, but who is practicing them? Who is practicing them? Many of you are from the States, so being native English speakers, you may recall, as I do, as a child, some of the things we used to say. They well express everything that you need to know about awakening. As a kid, we used to play a game. Come out, wherever you are. There it is. Or if you wanted in terms of the more Zenistic ox herding pictures, Ali, Ali, oxen free. Or this old man came rolling home. You remember that one? This old man, he played one, he played knick-knack on his shoe. This old man came, or woman came rolling home. It's all there, manifest. Where can you be stuck? I ask you here and now, where, what is there to be stuck on? What chains have you made, fashioned for yourself, tied yourself up in, and then said, I want to be free? What chains have you let go so that you could then pick up another set of chains and tangle yourself up in that? There are no chains. All you need to do is confirm that for yourself in your own bones, not in your own chains, in your own bones. To be free, even from the need to be free. That is the practice of awakening. In a sense, if you are practicing properly, it's not so difficult to get to the point where all of the hindrances are gone. All of the chains are seen through for what they are. They have no hold. It's really not so difficult. If you're practicing properly and you give all of yourself to get to that point. In a sense, the real practice is then to live the rest of your life without picking up any other chains. To do what we can to help others see through their own self-made chains, delusions. that they grasp on so desperately and then say, but I want to be free. See what you are doing. As I often say, when you really see that this is what must be done, it will be done. It already is done. But to really make it clear in body, in breath, and in mind, in the activities of the world, yes, this is a lifetime of practice. And this is where genuine guidance can really be helpful. If you see the need to do that, you can always be in touch. For some time, I don't know how long, I will not be able to come to Canada, the States, Mexico, Europe, Australia, so on. But it can't go on that long. So when I can get back there, I look forward to this marvelous practice together, physically together. But for now, we have this. We have this online practice. No, it's not the same thing as physical presence, but it is what we have. Let us make use of it. When you see this is what must be done, I'm here for you. I want to leave plenty of time for questions from out of the practice. Where? How can you be stuck? What chains have you wrapped yourself up in? These questions, concerns can be helpful, not just for you, but for others as well. So please feel free to raise them for the benefit of all. Thank you, Marie-Claude, for your gracious hosting, and thank you all for your presence here. We are all doing this together.
Okay. What could you say? I mean, we just realize, we see with the practice, how our suffering comes from our identification to ourselves, to our viewpoint, to our opinion, and we see all around in the world the suffering that comes from that fact, that all the people or politicians or whatever, they don't realize the source of the suffering is there. I mean, you can have opinion, you can think something, but don't, grab it that much. So you won't be you will suffer less, and you will make the others suffer less. I just want to hear a few words from you about that. I know it's not exactly about the practice, but
as you well know, when we go through the practice, the distress, the dis-ease that we feel is released. As this becomes real, manifest, it naturally starts to work in the world, so to speak. There are things we can do intentionally, things that we can learn. For example, how to provide care for others, a very relevant thing this year, huh? We can take up a new career, for example, and learn how to care for others. But you see, don't you, in your daily life, whoever we are, whatever we do, we are caring for others, aren't we? We're not separate from them. We may not be a social worker or a medical doctor or a nurse, but we are human beings together with other human beings. And so as that distress, dis-ease is released, is found to be without basis in us, that us is also released, isn't it? You follow?
Yeah, of course.
And so, no, we will not solve all the problems of the world, but we will do what we can with the support of others around us. And it goes on. How far does it go? How big of an effect will it have? In a sense, these questions are irrelevant, aren't they? How do we measure it? How much time do we give? With a pure heart, open, giving to others, being there with others, sharing in their distress, their dis-ease. They come to see that they also are free of distress and dis-ease. They have eyes, they can see. They have hearts, they can feel. You already know this, don't you? I don't know if I've responded adequately to your question. If you want to ask further, or if someone else would like to respond, please feel free. Alan, do you have anything else to say?
Thank you. It was refreshing. Thank you.
Oh, um, well, I can see your first name, but Banu,
Martha?
Okay. Your first name is, you didn't write it.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. Jeff, I have a question. I would like, it's a question of kindergarten, I think. I would like you to explain it first in other words in English, what is grabbing, and in Zen.
Grabbing?
Yeah?
Grasping or grabbing?
Yes. Yes, and I would like to go more profound in this. Exactly means.
So what is grasping, attachment, craving?
Okay.
Is this what you're asking about?
Yes, it's attachment. We can see like attachment. Yeah.
Buddhism has a profound understanding of this, as seen in relation to everything else. But very simply, we can say when the delusion of self arises, there is inevitably, it cannot be helped. It's a part of that structure. The self is split. That is the nature of the self. The self is split. it is and it isn't. It's living, but it will die. It wants to do good, but sometimes it does bad. By its very nature, the self is split. And so it does various things to try to overcome that split. The split, it's in itself, it's split from others, and it's split from the world. You understand?
Yeah.
Again, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Buddhism does not spend too much time on that because it doesn't matter. The point is, if we are a self, we are split. If we look deeply, this is clear. And as long as that self is the focus, the self-centered self, we are enmeshed in that, we are stuck in that. We cannot help but have an attachment because we seek to get out of that situation. We cannot come to rest in ourselves because we're split. In some way, we already know this. That's the cause of our dis-ease. We try to rest and take it easy. What happens after a while? We get bored, nothing to do. So then we jump into activity again and we find ourselves enjoying that for a little while, but then, oh, it's too busy. It's too busy. I have to have time, free time, free time. I'm bored. It's the self is by its nature unstable. It cannot come to rest. It's split. And so it seeks something, someone. You see? It cannot help but do that. It's not wrong or bad or evil. It's of its nature. You see? So it seeks something to heal the wound that it feels. You see? And it grasps on to something. It holds on to something or someone. We all know the pain that happens. And then jealousy, anger, fear, resentment, feelings of being left. It is endless, that cycle, until the self can see directly into itself. In a sense, that's all that Zazen is. Zazen is not doing that, right? It's not grabbing on to anything or anyone. You follow, Martha?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
And in the beginning, it can be very difficult because we sit there and start to grab onto Zazen because that's the way the mind works. Now I'm going to do this and I'm going to grab onto that awakening, right? I'm going to get awakened. And so it starts an agenda. Awakening has just been turned into an object of attachment. It's not awakening at all. So perhaps as a background to your question, Martha, to see that the nature of the self is split. And because of that, it cannot help but seek something somewhere to try to fulfill itself. But of course, nothing will work because that itself is, that split is still there. A bigger car, a bigger wife, a bigger job. When will you be satisfied? When will it be enough? Never, if the self is still split. Do you want to continue on, Martha? Or does that help?
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Jeff?
Good morning here.
From a purely academic point of view,
We don't deal with academics here. This is a practice. Question raised.
I was just going to say that they call that either the 5 skandhas or aggregates, or the 12 links of dependent origination. Starts with ignorance and coming, and then birth, and then old age and death, and then the cycle. And the big thing is what you just talked about, is ignorance because of this idea of a separate independent self, and clinging and grasping for sense objects, sexual pleasure, becoming, or extinction, as you mentioned yesterday. All of our desires create this continued ignorance and this continued hankering after sense objects, which in turn leads to becoming, birth leads to death, death leads to rebirth, and so the cycle continues. So I guess in a way, Zen is the antidote, where if you can cut off the ignorance, the delusion of a separate self, then you can cut off the clinging and the grasping and the becoming and the rebirth, and experience what you described yesterday as nirvana. But reading about it and doing it are 2 different things.
Hello, Jeff.
Michael?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question. It's a bit provocative about the self. I mean, we try to look through the self and to let it go. But sometimes I wonder whether the self not has an interesting function or a useful function, because maybe how we end up in a niche in our life, become a specialist for something without a self, or if we would start this process very early in life, would we actually get there? So this is my question.
Yeah, the self is a very ambiguous term. Is the point to become a zombie, to have no self? Certainly not. I would say, I don't use the term, for example, the true self, which is sometimes used in Zen, because then you have the idea, well, there's a true self, well, there must be a false self. So we get rid of the false self and we're left with the true self. So I prefer the literal term from Pali or Sanskrit, anatta or anatman. No self, but that's, as you're perhaps suggesting, pretty negative then. So I prefer translating it very freely as being without self. In other words, the form, the container, a self-centered self, a shell that we reside in. This is not real, and we can confirm that in our life. In a way, I think you're suggesting this, Michael. It's true every day of our life. We are losing ourselves in a good way. Whenever we do something we love, whenever we're involved, one with something, really listening right now, where is the self? So it's not that we have to deny individuality or the the particularness of the person, not at all. I would say the true individual is only realized in being without self. As long as it is being with self, you see, we have contained it. We have contained it, but it cannot be contained. It does not need to be contained. It is not a thing. So to simply say, yeah, no self, yeah, bring up children and they cannot, have a self. They cannot use the word self. Well, this is pointless. As I often say, when I go out of the Zendo, I put on my shoes and not yours. When I go home, I go to my house and not yours. But I don't need a self to do that, do I? So it is subtle, Michael. In what sense do we find ourselves, and in what sense do we lose ourselves? Would you like to respond to that?
No, I think it was a perfect response. Yeah, thank you very much for illuminating this.
There is a lot of distortion as a result of this teaching. No self. We just have to destroy every sense of the individual. No. Release it. Let it be what it truly is. And that is being without self. Okay, Michael?
Yeah, because I mean, out of this differentiation process, if one looks at it as a tree of life, which always branches off, and so innovation comes from this progress, so-called progress, which is fueled by desire too. So it's tricky, yeah, because it's fueled by what's the next new thing. So can one uphold this process of differentiation without this desire? That's in a way the question.
Yeah, as David brought up, he gave a very clear description in early Buddhism of how this dependent chain of co-origination, from ignorance, so on, it's all connected. There is no absolute beginning, though. If you actually look at it, sometimes different terms are used as the beginning, the relative speaking beginning. Is it ignorance? Well, sometimes there are other chains and there are other ways of describing it. But the point is, as David has shown, it's incredible. How could you have done that if you simply were in yourself, being a self? You can't see the 5 skandhas if you're simply an ego self. It's impossible to see it with that clarity, or to see all existence as dependently co-arising. In a sense, that's the result of awakening. When you awaken, you realize that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's what is, and that is no other than nirvana. So to be blunt, I would say, rather than destroying our individuality, it is fulfilled in awakening. Our true individuality. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yes, thank you.
Alain Patrick?
We might see the self as a kind of blessed wound.
A kind of restroom?
Wound, something that happened to us that's terrible, but it's also blessed, because it's the start of the humanity, and it is also the source of our spiritual quest. So we are working to go back where we come from. It's how sometimes I see the self. It was useful for the progress of humanity, and the suffering is blessed. I mean, it's why we are all together.
Thank you.
Jeff, I don't know if we still have
David?
time. But I was thinking, based on what you just said about no self, of Master Hakuin's chant. And, you know, when he says, our own self, our true self is no self, our own self is no self. And then we go beyond ego and past clever words. I get that. Not experientially, but I get it intellectually. But then he says, then the gate to the oneness of cause and effect is thrown open. Not two and not three, straight ahead runs the way. Our form now being no form, and going and returning, we never leave home. It sounds very Japanese, Chinese in its expression, but you hear that in a lot of different types of literature with Buddhism, this never leaving home, going and returning, even the concept of the Tathagata, you know, thus come, thus go, or thus go, thus come. So I guess the question is, was he talking about formlessness there, adaptability? Having no doctrine, having no philosophy, having no preferences and no aversions.
I suppose in a sense, he certainly was speaking about that, but formless is very easy to misunderstand. I've spent a couple of decades working on this. Is this the right word? Literally, it means without form. There are Sanskrit, Pali, Chinese, Japanese expressions, literally without form. By the way, some of the Chinese expressions, the character that is used also means color, passion, desire. They're all connected. Well, you know from Sanskrit, right? The whole idea in India of something having form, being limited, delimited, and how much this is wrapped up with the notion then of desire, of seeking to go beyond itself, and the trap there, so to speak. So Buddhism, instead of speaking about Atman as the ultimate reality, actually turns it on its head and uses the term anatman, or anatta in Pali, without self, not Atman, but not, there is no Atman, there is nothing that holds it all together. The real point being, you don't need to hold it all together. Do you?
So when Buddha reportedly says, wonder of wonders, we are all endowed with this wonderful Buddha nature, is that mini Atman, a reincarnatable existent, or is he just referring to the nature of awakening?
Yeah, that's a very important notion in Mahayana Buddhism, the idea that all beings are endowed with the virtuous characteristics, the formless nature of the Tathagata. But you see how easily that can then be turned into another nature, another thing.
There's a whole school that basically replaces the Atman with the Tathagatarba, or the Buddha seed, as if it's a thing to be reincarnated. But somehow I don't think that was, you know,
The intention.
what Buddha said, because his other teachings, like you talked about last night, the fire is out.
Well, I would put it very bluntly and not very philosophically. The self trapped in itself, the ego self, can become attached to anything. It can corrupt anything it comes into contact with. because that seeking, as Martha mentioned, that desire to fulfill itself is still there. So even meditation can become an object of our desire, as awakening can, as the Tathagata Garbha, anything taken up as an object by the self can be corrupted. That's why practice is what it is. That's the practice of Zazen. Zazen is what? Zazen is taking up nothing.
Right.
Because anything, even the Zazen, we have to be careful. Even that posture, that attitude, so-called, can become an object of desire. Yeah, I want to go back there. The ego self can corrupt anything it comes into contact with, no matter how noble or holy it may seem. Is that a good way of condensing it?
Yes, thank you.
Leon Redler, you raised your hand just, no? Okay.
Leon, how old are you?
You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm 84.
84. Well, you're not a spring chicken anymore, huh? But when you sit, you turn sideways, and your back and your neck and your head are just as straight as a 20-year-old, huh? You might want to guide us on how to do that.
Well, I think what I found most helpful, as far as that goes, is a practice I did in the 1980s, the Alexander technique, it's called. I mean, I've done other things like Tai Chi and Qigong, but I think in terms of what you're referring to, what I found most helpful was the Alexander technique, which I went to recommended by a musician friend. And then the guy who was teaching me was a student of Alexander. And one way or another, I ended up training as a teacher. I never practiced it professionally, but I did spend 3 years learning it very well. And I think it's been an enormous help in terms of just that ability to sit, sometimes anyhow, upright without being uptight.
Upright without being uptight. Maybe if there's anyone here who would like some guidance in that, they could contact you. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Leon Redler, huh?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was impressed with your sitting and trying to remember how old you were. Yeah. Thank you.
We may have time for just maybe one short question or comment. Oh, Guy, please.
Est-ce que Louis pourrait traduire pour moi, s'il vous plaît?
Oui, avec plaisir, Guy. I'll translate what Guy will be saying in French.
Thank you.
À partir du moment où nous percevons que ce dans quoi nous baignons, notre univers est quelque chose d'impossible, notamment par une question comme comment se fait-il que la matière existe? Je vais continuer après, Louis, si tu veux continuer.
C'est que la phrase était déjà très longue, Guy.
OK.
Est-ce que tu peux recommencer par section plus courte?
D'accord.
S'il te plaît? À
partir du moment où on constate que notre univers est quelque chose d'impossible.
When we consider that the universe in which we live is impossible, when we see it that way.
comme par exemple de dire comment se fait-il que la matière existe?
Like saying, for example, how come matter exists?
Alors, ça devient une sorte de grand mystère.
So it becomes a kind of vast mystery.
À partir du moment où on accepte que ce soit un mystère,
If we do accept that it is a mystery,
est-ce qu'on peut considérer cela comme un début d'éveil?
can we consider this understanding as a kind of opening towards awakening?
Merci.
Thank you.
Yes, but does what you just said also apply to yourself, G?
Ce que tu viens de dire, Guy, est-ce que ça s'applique à toi-même?
Oui, dans un certain sens, je pourrais aussi expliquer autre chose.
He says, yes, it does. And he could explain further on.
He could explain.
Further on, he could go on explaining what he...
OK.
Rather than explaining, if this is really clear of yourself,
Plutôt que d'expliquer si ceci est vraiment clair pour toi-même.
Oui, c'est clair pour moi.
where does this question come from?
D'où vient la question que tu as posée?
Nous cherchons tous l'éveil et quelquefois on l'a peut-être réalisé sans le savoir.
Guy says we all are looking for awakening, and at times we may have found it without knowing it, without understanding it.
That's very true.
C'est très vrai.
Sometimes the best models, if I use that term, for us are people who may have never heard of Buddhism or Zen and yet are living their lives being without self.
Jeff dit que parfois, les meilleurs modèles pour nous sont des personnes qui ont peut-être jamais entendu parler du Zen, mais qui vivent leur vie comme des personnes éveillées.
Je peux suggérer une comparaison.
Guy would like to suggest a comparison,
If it's necessary.
si c'est nécessaire,
Si ça peut aider quelqu'un,
if it can help someone,
Please.
s'il te plaît.
imaginons qu'il y a plusieurs ondes dans les airs, des ondes, notamment des ondes qui peuvent être des ondes sonores ou des ondes, quelles que soient des ondes, une onde.
Okay, so Guy is saying, let's imagine that in the surrounding air, there are all different kinds of waves.
Pour révéler ces ondes, il suffit d'avoir un appareil radio.
To reveal these waves, all you need is a radio.
Et quand la radio est syntonisée sur un poste, on a une sorte d'onde, c'est-à-dire on a une certaine musique ou
And when that radio is tuned to a certain wavelength, you catch some kind of music, or
et si on syntonise sur un autre poste, on a une autre musique.
and if we tune it to another station, we get another kind of music.
Nous, êtres humains, je me perçois comme une radio.
He sees himself as a human being like a radio, so he can tune in.
Je fais juste prendre conscience que l'onde existe, mais que c'est pas que je baigne dedans, mais que je suis un révélateur de cette onde.
So he's
Moi-même, je me révèle.
saying, I'm aware that I'm only a kind of receptor
Hmm.
from a wave, but I'm not the wave. I don't know the wave, but I catch it. I capture it in a way.
C'est ma perception.
Okay, that was the comparison. Merci, Guy.
Merci.
Je pense que
Il n'y a pas de commentaire de Jeff?
Jeff, do you want to comment the
No
comparison?
Well, it has often been said that Zazen is like tuning ourselves, becoming attuned.
On a souvent dit que le zazen ressemblait, permettait de, how do you say that, de se synchroniser sur les ondes, disons.
Yes. Tuning ourselves to what? Let me leave it there.
Exact. C'est ça. Jeff aimerait laisser la comparaison ouverte. Se synchroniser sur quoi? Point d'interrogation. Laissons ça ouvert.
Sur ce qui est.
Yeah, tune in with what is, on what is.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Louis.
Jeff, so it's time to say thank you very much for this 2 evenings with us. It's wonderful, really. And if you want to come back tomorrow, you're welcome.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please continue to the end, making great use of this precious opportunity. Thank you all. Marie Claude, thank you.